This is episode 29 of Cinescope, and they should make pills for this. Welcome to Cinescope, where our goal is not to criticize or to assign ratings, but rather to celebrate the movies we love, exploring story, characters, music, and relevance to the world around us. I'm your host, Chad Hopkins, and returning to the podcast today is Eric Scull to talk about one of his favorite films, Serendipity. Eric, how are you doing tonight?
Good, man. It's great to be back.
Yeah, it's good to have you back. One of the things that I never would have expected with this podcast was one, to get one of the people from the podcast I'd been listening to for nearly a decade onto my show. And further than that, to actually become friends with that person and to have regular contact with that person. So since you appeared on episode 3, when we talked about frequency, we've talked quite a bit. We've Snapchatted each other. It's been a real cool time.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's the way to my heart, as you know, because you did it, is just to invite me to talk about a movie that I love, because I love movies. So, as we found out the first time, but I'm thrilled to be back Valentine's week this year to talk about my favorite romantic movie, which I verified because, in rewatching, it had been a while and I wanted to make sure that it was in fact still up there. And yes, I can contest that this is in fact my favorite romantic movie.
Yeah, I had seen it before, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But just to remind people out there, who are you? What do you do? Where can people find you?
Sure. I am Eric Scull. I currently live in Chicago, Illinois, and you may recognize my voice if you've listened to a couple of podcasts throughout the years. I'm currently on MuggleCast, which is celebrating its 11th, or actually going on 12th year on the air. And that's a Harry Potter podcast, as well as another Harry Potter podcast called Alohomora. And also, I edit the Improvised Star Trek podcast, which is absolutely amazing. You should go and check it out. It's a long-form improvised comedy set in the world of Star Trek. It's a blast, and I have a lot of fun doing it.
Awesome, and I'll make sure to give you time to plug those again later, and those will be in the show notes as well, so people can find them.
Yeah, that's what I'm up to. Other than that, I'm really just enjoying the winter, getting a lot done, and feeling very productive.
You know this, Eric. I am not feeling at my absolute best this week.
Poor dude.
I've been battling probably what I think is convention plague after visiting San Antonio this past week, and I got some good root beer at my favorite San Antonio restaurant, but since then it's just not been a fun week for me, but I'm ready to power through. I watched this movie earlier today, and I'm looking forward to talking with you about it.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, before we do talk about it, our typical reminders every week. Please, if you like the show, please consider taking a minute or two out of your day, rate and review it on iTunes, subscribe to it on iTunes, and other than that, if you've already done that, then go ahead and share it with your friends on Twitter, on Facebook, wherever you see fit. If you have friends who like movies and would benefit from listening to our show, then please consider sharing it with them so we can continue to grow. And I think that's all as far as covering our bases this week. So, Eric, are you ready to talk about our movie?
I'm ready, man.
Awesome. This week's movie is Serendipity. It was released on October 5th of 2001 and was directed by Peter Chelsom, who also directed Town and Country, Shall We Dance, Hannah Montana the movie, Hector and the Search for Happiness, and most recently, The Space Between Us, which just came out last year, I believe. It was written by Mark Klein, and the music was by Alan Silvestri, who's one of my favorites. He is most frequently known as the collaborator of Robert Zemeckis, so the Back to the Future films, Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
To the Future.
Yes, sir. And outside of his work with Zemeckis, he did Predator 1 and 2, The Abyss, Father of the Bride 1 and 2, Stuart Little, Lilo and Stitch, Night at the Museum, and its sequel, Battle of the Smithsonian, Captain America the First Avenger, The Avengers, and is set to compose the scores for the upcoming Avengers sequels, Infinity War and Avengers 4.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, looking forward to that for sure.
Quite a body of work, actually, and yeah, I love Silvestri.
Me too. I love how diverse he can be.
Especially showcased by this film. not to get too much into it now, but this does not sound at all like some of his other stuff, which is great. I think it perfectly fits this movie.
Agreed. This movie stars John Cusack, Kate Beckinsale, Molly Shannon, Bridget Moynihan, Jeremy Piven, John Corbett, and Eugene Levy. I don't know exactly how to pronounce that last name, but that's okay. So, Eric, how about you start us off? What was your first experience with this movie?
First experience with this movie, I actually went and saw it with my mom and sister at a local movie theater when this film first came out. And I just remember, I think, having seen the trailer on TV beforehand, and maybe just for something to do. My mom was like, well, let's go see this movie. So I actually remember seeing it in theaters with them, but really liking it. And a couple of years later, after my first summer job, I was starting to get paid and amass a small DVD collection. And this was one of the first DVDs that I bought. The first DVD I bought was The Matrix, of course. Got to showcase the DVD. But Serendipity was one of the first 10, I think, that I got. And I do watch the movie occasionally, and I have lots of just fond recollections of it. I really like this movie.
Your first DVD was cooler than mine. I think mine was Baby Geniuses. So
really, I didn't know that had a DVD release. I didn't know that
2000, I think, or 1999 when it first came out, and I was around that age when I got my first DVD player. So yeah,
love it.
Not entirely proud of it, but it's a Christopher Lloyd movie, so
it is. He was great in that, and that was another film I saw in theaters. God, but they made a sequel or two that I definitely did not see.
Right. Well, regarding Serendipity, I didn't know much about this movie. I knew it was a romantic comedy, and the thing is, it's not starring the typical rom-com people, I don't think. In fact, looking through their filmography today, I think I can pretty confidently say I had previously seen one movie apiece in John Cusack's and Kate Beckinsale's filmography, and that would be Anastasia, starring with John Cusack, and the other one was Click, starring Kate Beckinsale and Adam Sandler.
Well, first of all, that is drastically low turnout. That's a criminally low number of their films. I could name many more that you must see for each actor. I mean, Cusack has been in nearly everything. Better Off Dead, he was I'd say is a great just 80s romp teen movie. Of course, everything he's done since then. And Kate Beckinsale. Actually, this was my first film that I saw or can remember seeing Kate Beckinsale in. And it may have, I think I'm looking up her, she's got credits back, dating back early 90s, even before that. But I think this was one of her first mainstream films, now come to think of it. And then Click was 2006, and that was long after she had also starred in The Aviator with Leo DiCaprio, Van Helsing with Hugh Jackman, and of course, what you should have already seen her in, Underworld, where she's the leading vampiress, Celine.
Right. I think the Underworld series is what most people sort of associate Kate Beckinsale with, but I just had never seen them. Still haven't. So,
well, maybe one day we'll talk about those films.
Maybe we will see. But all that goes to say that I didn't really have any expectation for those actors. Even I mean, I know the name Molly Shannon. I've seen some of the things she's been in, and Eugene Levy, of course. But other than that, I really didn't know anybody in this cast list, and so it was nice going into a movie with a completely sort of fresh palette.
I like that a lot. Yeah.
Right. You don't get that very often. So I really did enjoy that. And aside from that, I just knew this was a rom-com. And, Eric, I asked you if you were going to be able to see Lego Batman before seeing this movie. I'm not going to spoil the connection because, there is a very strange, but there's a connection there between Lego Batman movie and this movie. And so as soon as you see that, you're going to have to let me know.
I cannot fathom what it might be. You teased this the other day. I'm like, I can't. I'm thrilled. I'm pleased. I hope it's worthwhile. I hope you're not just shining me on, but I can't wait. I hope it's substantial. I do, but yeah, I'm thrilled. I can't wait. Definitely going to see Lego Batman at my earliest convenience.
Right. I don't want to spoil that for you or for anybody else on the show who hasn't seen Lego Batman yet. But once you do, I think the connection between that movie and this one is going to make you laugh at least.
Unbelievable. I'm looking very forward to it. That'll be great.
So let's go ahead and jump into it. What in the story do you like here, Eric?
This movie is so different, I think, than your traditional romantic comedy. I mean, the humor in it's a very funny film, but none of it is at the expense of any of its characters, I think. And the endless wonder and awe in the premise itself, right? The idea that fate exists and is actively, almost overactively, if, depending on how closely you watch this film, guiding us to find something like our soulmate. And so it's a very mushy, romantic premise, but I think it's executed in a way, it's played straight. It's executed in such a way that the universe itself, in this film is like really a character, and I think that's captured quite well just throughout the film. You really believe that these sort of minute happenstance occurrences could link up, and I think they make the case for fate, honestly, even, not to sound too cheesy, because again, with any of these films you can just come across as sounding cheesy, and I'm so worried about that. But I love these characters, and honestly, I think it's a different role for each of them too. Like John Cusack is not just playing the John Cusack role. Kate Beckinsale is not just playing the Kate Beckinsale role. I think Kate in particular in this film has this. She really believes it, right? That this character who is so vulnerable, or allowing herself to be, and John Cusack's character to a lesser extent too, they allow themselves to be swept up in this idea. And I think that it's really kind of crucial to the story, seeing these characters behave in this way. It's not without skepticism. They both at different points lose faith, and they both, the sort of main separation between them, it's a couple years between the sort of opener part of the movie and the rest of the movie. They have the opportunity to show how these characters have changed or not. And so I think it's a really well acted film.
I agree. Speaking to the idea of fate, the Rotten Tomatoes critics consensus, I'm not going to rely on Rotten Tomatoes for knowledge on whether a film is good or bad, but the consensus here is it's light and charming. Serendipity could benefit from less contrivances. And I think that's sort of missing the point, because you're right. This movie is about the idea or the notion of fate, or the idea that things that happen are meant to happen. And there's a path that we're all sort of set out on in life. And so I think, again, that Rotten Tomatoes summary sort of misses the point, because I agree with you. It doesn't ever feel purely contrived here. It's trying to explore this idea of things happening for a reason, and I appreciated that.
Yeah, contrivances is not any. I think that's the wrong way of looking at it. Well, just out of curiosity, what is the current tomato meter reading, if you're still on the site?
It's at 58%.
58? Okay. Well, I love this movie. I know the whole premise is, right, talk about your favorite movie, and I've done that with frequency as well. But to come on and be able to talk about Serendipity as my second time on feels right, because I think that this film is special, and I want to remember it, and I want to watch it and rewatch it. I was thrilled that it's currently available on Netflix Instant, so listeners of the show who have Netflix also can just watch it and experience it for yourself, in addition to having listened to this episode and hearing us talk about it. But it's really a shame that the mainstream but that's never, as you said, it's never really guided whether or not a movie's good for us. So that's good.
Yeah, on Cinescope, we try and talk about a whole wide variation of films, and this definitely fits into that mold. I like that it's a rom-com that doesn't necessarily follow the typical rom-com trope, which is couple meets, they fall in love, they have a falling out, they get back together, they get married, live happily ever after, or whatever it is, right? That doesn't really happen in this movie. In fact, this movie is less about a straight up romance than it is the pursuit of the romance, or maybe even on a deeper level, the pursuit of happiness. Because both of these people, they meet at the beginning of the film and then they go on and they live their lives because they're not together. And they find somebody else special in their lives. But in finding somebody else special and getting engaged to them, they start to realize, maybe I'm not the happiest I could have been in this relationship. And they start finding an excuse, because it is a long shot trying to find this person from however many years back, and somebody that they just met once for a few hours even, the chances are slim. And I think they both recognize that. And more than trying to find each other, they're trying to find an excuse to leave the relationship they're in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I like that you said that too. And interestingly, what, I was thinking about this. I was reading on IMDb the trivia, and it says here that John Cusack and Kate Beckinsale only filmed together for a few days because their characters only see each other for a couple scenes. And so a lot of the film that's about the pursuit, and you inhabit both of these characters' world. The John Cusack and Jeremy Piven character, so John and Dean, and Kate Beckinsale and Molly Shannon character, searching and helping their it's about those two character pairings, sort of their friendship, and how the friends see them and how their own life view, rubs off. But the actual John and Kate scenes are more than it feels like, but still apparently low enough in number that there were only a few days ever spent on set. And that also speaks to their chemistry, I think, because they really have good chemistry, in my opinion. And you really believe the romance. You really believe that these characters would fall for each other for the reasons that they do. But it's just shocking. I mean, actors can act, I guess.
What else in the story do you like here, Eric?
I love how robust the world is in general. I mean, of course, there's all the little fate signs, which I'd love to talk more about at length. But even the tertiary characters and peripheral characters, even like Eugene Levy as the desk clerk, I would say is secondary character or tertiary. But peripheral characters such as Sebastian Mignon, the guy who was like a co-tenant with Sarah back in, I guess it was 1994. That guy, and that scene with that guy when they're trying to discern, trying to interrogate him, is so funny, and it's so, he is so genuine of a character. You really believe this person exists. I guess he's a three-dimensional character.
Right. I really liked Eugene Levy's character for those reasons as well. He made me laugh, for one, but he was also sort of helpful in the same sense that the Mr. Mignon was helpful as well. He wasn't just a throwaway character who put them on the direction to the next step. He sort of gave them information that placed them farther on that path.
Well, yeah, the film sort of puts each clue up on a pedestal, and I think the human clues, where it essentially has these character relationships, that's what matters. Like I think the premise of fate being behind everything would fall flat if you didn't have it being supported by characters who you really feel like their very meeting and their interaction was fated. So for the fact that like Molly Shannon's character too ends up being an old college friend of Hallie, who John's character is, marrying, it's just another connection, but you love it because it really is, it does seem like the path is clear. Because the characters are whole characters, you believe their interactions were fated. Right.
You've written in our show notes setups and payoffs, so let's go over some of the setups and payoffs that are in this movie.
Yeah, so just like it seems like script writing 101. I know this was talked about when we had our frequency discussion, and it's also a big, I think we were making the connection to Back to the Future as well.
Right.
Those films And because they deal with time travel too, but those films in general just have so many of these setups and payoffs. A character will say something, and later down the line, half an hour later in the film, it will come back. And with this film, it's particularly used to, I think, make the case for fate, but there's just so much of it. So each character, Sarah and John, send off this item into the world. Jonathan Traeger writes his phone number down on a $5 bill. Sarah writes her number and info in a first edition book. And so you have that initially, but then you also have different locations later on. So the golf guy, for instance, that Sarah runs into is from or is handing out flyers for the place where John just was sort of filming. It's the golf place where he's been filming some footage and where he was just the day before the wedding. So, you have all of these different little things coming into play more than once, and some of them are more obvious than others.
Right. The big one for me was the purse, the Prada versus Prado. Watching the first time, you may think that scene where Eve is buying a knockoff Prada purse on the side streets of New York might just be a throwaway, but then she...
Yeah, because that's something you can totally do in New York.
Right,
you can buy a cheap knockoff purse off the side of the street. You can.
Right, and then they make the distinction there that Sarah's knockoff, she has a knockoff too, but hers actually says Prada, whereas the one Eve just bought says Prado. And so
neither of them actually have a Prada purse?
Right. But then later in the film, towards the end of the film actually, when Sarah is on the flight home, she pulls out the purse and, oh, it's the Prado purse. Oh, that's how that ties in. Got it. And that's how she finds the $5 bill that John signed his name and number on so many years ago and convinces her to jump off the plane and go find him.
Oh, and where did Eve get that $5 bill? It was at Serendipity.
Of course.
Yeah, of course. And a couple more. The Cool Hand Luke poster. So the night they meet, they're ice skating, and Sarah's asking Jonathan what is, among other things, what his favorite movie is. He says Cool Hand Luke. In the future, she's running out. It's after the band gig, and they're talking about their wedding dates, and she just goes outside, I think, for a smoke. And she happens to see, that's it. She's trying to light her cigarette or whatever. And she just happens to look in the window, and there's a film festival going on, and they're showing Cool Hand Luke. And there's the movie poster right in front of her. And she sees it and she recognizes it, sure. But it's just those little things, that little detail, micro details played out on the macro level to have our characters interacting with such tiny, minute occurrences and putting such weight in them. The big thing that sticks out too is the little sequence when Jonathan is first sort of remembering about Sarah. There's the guy in the bicycle with the Hall & Oates. His hairdresser is, the regular girl is not here right now, but I'm Sarah. I'll cut your hair. And he leaves. He just runs out. He says, no good. When he's at the golf range, there's a British woman named Sarah who, he doesn't see from the front, but she says, I'm Sarah. And it's this onslaught, this onslaught of Sarahs. And even just her name, which is all he has to go on, is hearing it again and again. It is this impetus for him to seek harder.
And have you ever watched How I Met Your Mother, Eric?
I have not. No.
Well, this movie actually sort of reminds me of a long form version of a particular episode where Ted is at a wedding and he meets somebody and they keep their name secret from each other. And the idea is for them to have this one perfect night that can never be ruined because it's never going to go any further than this one perfect night. And then eventually they try and chase each other down. And that seems almost exactly like what this movie is, except it's just on a much larger level. That's what I was thinking when I was watching, because the earnestness behind John's character is very much like Ted in seeking out the woman for him, his soulmate. That's sort of the whole idea of How I Met Your Mother, the show, is that Ted is just trying to find the one girl meant for him and is constantly unsuccessful. But in this movie, John has found a woman, but he doesn't believe it's the one for him just yet. And so that similarity there really sort of stuck with me as I was watching.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it's kind of about the layers in which that you choose to look when watching this film. There's the fact that Sarah's wedding ring, or engagement ring, doesn't fit her at first, right? And so Lars screwed it up, and even says to her, "Oh, you're not going to read, too much into this, are you?" After that grand romantic gesture of leaving all the rose petals in the box within a box, and every box is wrapped in tissue paper. After all that, the wedding ring doesn't fit. That's a sign. maybe in the absence of signs is a sign, but that is a sign. They're not meant to be together, and it really, you could just have fun with this film. It's such a preposterous suggestion, or is it? I think it makes a believer out of you. It might change your mind,
Well, let's talk about the characters just a little bit more specifically. So what about John do you have to say?
John is great. Jonathan Traeger as a leading man. He's sort of everyman-y, but he has passion. He has skill. He is still kind of, I want to say, wandering a little bit. He's got a successful job, and the woman is the next part that's going to complement his lifestyle. But I like his energy, I think I want to say. And he really inspires his friend, Jeremy Piven's character, Dean, which is obviously, later in the film, Dean admits to it. But the relationship between John and Dean in the film is actually like my favorite character. And believe it or not, which you might not know this, Chad, because you haven't seen other John Cusack films, but John Cusack and Jeremy Piven have played friends together in multiple films. They're friends in real life. So seeing this film without that knowledge, and without seeing one of the other multiple films that they've played together in as friends, would almost take you out of, or take something from the uniqueness of seeing it, and only this in this movie. Because I love their friendship in this movie more than all the other friendships I've seen. It's just really like rewarding. You believe they both care about each other and give each other, give and take. So it's really special.
Yeah, I think Jonathan, like you were talking about earlier, he's skeptical of this whole idea of fate. And then this relationship with his friend Dean, Dean is sort of skeptical at the beginning too, because John voices this concern. I keep hearing her name everywhere, and I just have to find this woman just to know that she's not the one I'm meant to be with. And Dean at first is skeptical, and he says, no, and then he buys into it, partially because I think he realizes how skeptical John usually is about this kind of thing, but remembering back to the obsession he had with it when it first happened, and always checking the bookstores and all that kind of stuff, I think that the fact that he buys into John's obsession really says a lot about their friendship, and shows that he's willing to do whatever it takes to make sure his friend finds happiness.
Yeah, and here's something that resonates real world wise too, which is that, like you said, like John still checks used bookstores. So much so that his wife, that's the wedding present, is the book that ends up being the book. But it's the idea that, you meet this other person for just a couple hours, and they change your life. That's something that really happens in real life. Even if it's not not even a romantic way, chance encounters do occur. And, you can have, based on just one conversation with somebody, I think, lasting effects and different outlooks on life based on single conversations. I have to believe that that's possible. And I think, I could think of examples of when it's happened to me. So the idea that John as a character was open-minded enough, it helps when you have this smoking hot British babe across the table from you saying it's real. But knowing, for instance, that they did in fact choose the same elevator floor, and the characters never talk about it. Stuff happens, and they never meet at the Waldorf there. But knowing that they pushed that button together, that same button, you really feel the same desperation, I think, that John feels when it doesn't work out, because he didn't believe in fate to begin with. But then he kind of, was really thinking about it. And then when it didn't happen and he couldn't find her ever again, that part of him that holds on, that part of him that wants to believe, that's the driving force of him being the main character of the protagonist. He wants to believe in something like that, and it's the fact that he does believe in it is ruining his current relationship, or it's not allowing him to progress to the point where he can truly move forward. Even though presumably he has proposed and is just a couple days away from his wedding, but it's sort of like both characters are settling, or not 100% acknowledging, because how can you? It's absurd to think that they would never get married until they find each other again. How they feel.
Right. Now, what about Sarah specifically?
Sarah's great. And Sarah is probably one of my favorite characters certainly in any romantic movie, but I really love the way Kate Beckinsale plays her. You have a big range of emotion here through her interactions, with Lars, even. Like when she's upset, she can bear the burden with Lars. Like Lars really brings out a lot of the range in Sarah. She's not just this innocent, believer who is, has such a bleeding heart about everything. She's intelligent. She's smart. She wants the happiness. She wants to be flexible enough and vulnerable enough of a person in general to see the signs. Because if you're too much of like a stoic hard rock, you won't even see them. That's her whole philosophy. She believes in something that's so beautiful, but she's also very caring. Think about what she does for a profession. She's a psychologist. And I think in her interactions with Lars, when he does disappoint her, she is still able to be caring towards him. And she is still able to, be as flexible as she can without breaking, without truly doing something that she does not want to be doing. She is giving, and she's a very generous character. She's a very generous person. And again, speaking to her being fully developed, not without flaws. Like what she initially tricks Eve into going back to New York, saying it's for her birthday, but it ultimately she owns up to it, and you can see and hear and feel why she does what she does. And so I think it's a lot of range there.
Well, to contrast with John, Sarah does sort of the opposite of John, whereas John starts to sort of come further into believing in the idea of fate and destiny and all those kind of things. She actually becomes a little bit more skeptical. We see her after we've jumped forward in time. She's being a therapist again, and she's talking to this young man who's saying, "No, this girl at the party, I didn't say anything to her. No, I'm never going to see her again." And she was my soulmate.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the same predicament that John has found himself in, but she finds herself giving the advice of, there's plenty other women out there that you're going to be happy with. Mm-hmm. Sort of the antithesis of the idea of fate. And she even acknowledges, maybe I'm starting to sort of believe that myself too.
Yeah.
And so you see the opposite side of the coin.
Yeah, for sure.
Any other characters specifically you want to talk about?
I do want to talk about Hallie and Lars, because it's such an interesting discussion in any romantic comedy to talk about the characters who lose. Right? I mean, essentially, Jonathan and Sarah find each other, have each other, but what about Lars and what about Hallie? Because there's these two perfectly fine people. I mean, let's be honest. Like, Lars is a really cool guy. He's got a successful or becoming successful music career. He's talented, and the film robs us, in its brief runtime, robs us of the final goodbye between Sarah and Lars. And, to I guess a similar extent, we do not actually see Jonathan and Hallie calling off the wedding, but we do get to see quite a bit more of Hallie being upset and Hallie being concerned for her marriage and for her pending marriage, and concerned for her friends. But, these characters are so fleshed out. I think you do care about them, and you do, I think, feel bad for Hallie, and you may feel bad for Lars while watching this film.
I agree. I don't really have much else to say about those characters specifically, but how about we talk about Dean just a little bit more for a second? Because Dean has his own interesting arc where at the beginning of the film, or at the beginning of the time jump forward, he's giving the best man speech at the sort of wedding dinner.
What a funny speech.
It is.
What a funny speech.
And we like the guy. And then John is talking with Hallie about how he and his wife are so happy together. You never see them fight. They're just so perfect together. And then comes out later in the film, oh, she moved out a couple days ago. We're not together anymore. And it really adds a new depth to Dean as a character in going along with John's search, because he has sort of lost his chance at happiness in the moment. He found somebody who ultimately is not right for him. And so in helping John on this search for his soulmate, he is helping somebody else maybe not fall into the same fate as him.
Well, I think what it is too, though, is that maybe Courtney is Dean's soulmate, but I think the whole point and what he was saying to John on the airline was, this mysticism was lacking in their relationship. Just the idea, just the kind of rhetoric, when you tell somebody that they're your soulmate. I mean, you shouldn't do that unless you really believe in, you should always be as honest with your significant other as you possibly can. But the idea that just in the greater romanticism, that aspect, to use Dean's word for it, died in that relationship. We see him, I think one of the last shots of him in the film is buying some roses to take to Courtney. He's gonna try and get her back. So he's by no means written her off.
No.
But there was a breakup, and they do or were fighting often, and there was a period of discomfort. It also says more about both Dean and Courtney, but also about Hallie and Jonathan. What kind of friends, even though they've broken up, probably can't stand each other right now because it's that anger part of the, just immediate post-breakup, are still banding together and coming to this wedding, right? And Dean is the best man, and Courtney is still a presence at this wedding because Dean says why. They don't want to, upset, or they don't want to cause any kind of concern and ruin their big day. So they're doing it for Jonathan and Hallie. They're still putting up appearances and, all of this. And that's ultimately a very nice thing to do. But it also speaks to how much they care for Jonathan and Hallie, and how they're both characters who can be loved and can get, they seem to have just such nice family, just such nice friends. And I think that's kind of a really heartwarming part of this movie.
I agree. And maybe I misspoke. I didn't mean that maybe him and Courtney aren't exactly right for each other, but they're out of happiness with each other in the moment. And so Dean is helping John to find what is ultimately going to make him happiest. And that helps him to realize, I am at my happiest when I'm with Courtney. And so I'm going to buy these roses and go off and apologize and try and make amends.
Exactly.
Right. So I like that part of his character.
Yeah, he's going to follow his own signs, as it were. And also, I mean, we talked about peripheral characters before, but the leasing office temp guy played by, I looked him up now on IMDb, the actor's Leo Fitzpatrick. But that brief scene where Dean, who just goes off on the tirade about pimple-faced youth, who's what does he say? Owning companies that sell no concrete product, this, that, the other thing. Talking his way into having this kid do something that's actually not, he's going to it breaks the rules.
Right.
It breaks serious privacy rules, actually, to release that sort of information. Even just to give somebody's name out, breaks some rules. But the way that Dean is there to be able to assist Jonathan, and he's able to lend the crucial, he's the missing puzzle piece a couple times, right? He has the knowledge, he has the skill. He's a good friend who is able to be useful, of use to Jonathan.
Right. Well, any other characters?
I think that's mostly it. It is important to note, because I think quite a lot of climax of this movie depends on remembering that Sarah has a sister.
Right.
You just meet her briefly, and there's so much else going on. Lars's band is just finished on stage, and then it's totally set up that they're going to be house sitting while Sarah's, away with Lars and all that. But I think when essentially knowing that Jonathan and Dean fly all the way there and then find Sarah's sister and her boyfriend in an intimate setting, of course, Jonathan thinks it's really Sarah. That part of the plot doesn't really connect necessarily, but it's essentially on the plane back, Jonathan cancels the wedding anyway. So you don't really need to see that revelation later that, oh, that was my sister. It's just one of those things where, the film was coming to its climax and it's like, well, we'll just explain this away. But I mean, everything from Sarah's sister, who seems very pleasant, and her sister's boyfriend, who seems really cool, and the landlord, for instance. Again, no small character. The landlord is great. And he manages to be in more than just one scene. Sarah interacts with him when she's trying to find him, and stop the wedding. So I love all the characters, man.
Agreed. Well, let's talk real quick about the music, because like most films in this sort of genre, a lot of the focus is more on the pop music than on the actual background score. So we don't get a whole lot of Alan Silvestri's score in this film, but the specific moment that I really noticed it was when John is laying on the ice skating rink.
Yes.
And it's very guitar. It is entirely guitar, pretty much.
Yeah.
And I really, really like that. It's as you were saying earlier, it's different than Alan Silvestri's sort of normal fare. It doesn't sound like Lilo and Stitch, or
it's
like
very
Back
muted.
to the Future. Yeah,
it's like dun 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 dun, and it's just like the same repetition of a chord, but it's soft, it's sympathetic, it's exploratory. I'm going to find where I can buy the actual Alan Silvestri score for this film, because I love it. I mean, this film has quite a lot of music in it that's pop music, like you were saying, covers of existing songs, also old standards as well, like in the opening credits. Lots of really great music, but Alan Silvestri's score is where it really, I think, opens up the universe. Every other song is selling the love angle, and Alan Silvestri was essentially hired to bring in the fate, aspect of it.
right. And looking at the soundtrack, I think there is one track on here by Alan Silvestri called Fast Forward.
Yeah, that's not my favorite. I had to open iTunes to listen to it. That's a less subtle part. I'm trying to remember where it appears in the film, but at least that made the soundtrack. I felt pretty good about that. But
well, there is a YouTube video that I found called Serendipity Romantic Ending, and I'll actually link it in the show notes because it does highlight the guitar score by Alan Silvestri in that moment.
Oh, good. Fantastic.
So anything else to say regarding the music? Unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of it to talk about since we don't have like a full release.
Lars is, we didn't talk enough about Lars. But that music, first of all, the music that he's playing on stage in live with the band is a song called From Rush Home with Love by a band called Mint Royale. That song is real, which is fantastic. I'm glad it wasn't just made for this movie, or if it was, it's featured so prominently in this film, but apparently that's a real band and a different song. So, definitely, I would encourage anyone to listen to that. And that instrument, which I forget what it's called. He mentions it in the film too. I think it starts with a C. That instrument is so exotic and interesting. And the song, not to mention the music video with the knockoff Alec Guinness, is such a rich part of this movie. I think it really elevates your typical romantic comedy.
Right, he's sort of like a knockoff Eastern Kenny G.
Yeah, I mean, you really have, I think, a lot of depth in that character. I mean, they shot this music video for this guy's character to run around in, playing this, it's so much more than they needed to do for fleshing out these characters, but they did it. And I love it. So I love, his conversations with him and his producer, and moving this tour back and scheduling. And you think from a script standpoint, oh yeah, they just need to introduce the conflict so that she can feel like this wasn't meant to be. Great. But it's done so well. So that song and really that music in general is a really interesting touch to this film.
Well, let's talk about themes and relevance. So the big one is the idea of destiny and fate. For me as a Christian, I like to think that my life isn't entirely random and that someone out there sort of has this ultimate plan for me and for my life. And so I really identified with maybe not the idea of seeking out. I don't know where I was going with that.
No, I like what you said there. It's really, we can choose to see signs anywhere we want, and it doesn't mean that they're really there, right? Like if we try too hard, and this is a struggle that the characters in the film deal with, looking too hard, but I would be completely lying if I said that I, at any point in my life or at some points in my life, did not feel as though I were seeing signs. And I think there's a balance, right? There's a delicate balance between making change in your life that's based on something that you feel is good and right, and doing sort of a trust fall into the world, and being perceptive and being open and being vulnerable, I think are the themes of this film. You ultimately, if you're in a bad situation, you should get yourself out of it. But then, if you're looking for what to do next, it's okay if you don't know the answer. And it's okay sometimes to rely on, first of all, the love of friends and family, but also, take a chance once in a while. Take a chance on a flyer that you get handed out on the street randomly, because it is funny. We have sayings like, what a small world it is, when you meet somebody who it turns out was a long-term mutual friend or you have a mutual friend, right? And your friend knew this person, but you did not know this person. Your friend knows you. It's just like that. So these things do occur in the real world. And I think that this film kind of it's titillating how it just plays with that idea of leaving yourself open, or opening your mind if you're not typically the kind of person who is open.
Right. I think that if we look at the signs in our life and act on them, not all of them, but I think some of them definitely have potential to lead to better paths for our lives. And it's really just about taking the chance and taking that first step and acting on what you think is the right thing for you.
I mean, I'll tell a story right now. I heard this again over Christmas, so just 2 months ago. But my cousin Andrew and his now wife went to the same college for undergrad for 4 years and did not know each other. They lived in dorms that were like just the next building over for 4 years in undergrad. Never met, never knew each other. Ended up going for their masters. Graduate school, same school. Different school from where they did undergrad, but same school as in they both went to the same graduate school, Penn State. And they also now were working and living, again, very close proximity to each other. Went to the same undergrad, went to the same graduate school, ended up meeting online on like Match.com or a dating site. It later transpires that they had mutual friends who knew each other and knew them separately. Also transpires that, well, holy crap, we're together. We go together very well. It turns out we could have known each other, and maybe even should have known each other 6 years ago, 8 years ago.
Right.
Because they were in such close physical proximity. Now they're married. It's stuff like that. It happens in real life, man.
I agree. I mean, my own parents, I think, went to a Ronnie Millsap's concert or something before they met each other. It just came out whenever they did start dating. They looked back and, we were both at the same concert at the same time. That's cool. Mm-hmm. So there are those sort of chance encounters that happen in real life. And this movie isn't necessarily saying that everything happens for a reason. I think it's just saying that sometimes life comes at you and I'm starting to sound like Ferris Bueller.
You sound exactly like Ferris. I was like, go into it, keep going.
No, I just mean that life happens and sometimes you have to make decisions that are going to introduce you to some people or lead you away from some people. And we just have to be open to it happening and looking at taking that next step forward.
Yeah, I don't think this film says or does anything that's offensive. Again, I feel bad for Hallie and Lars, of course, because I like them as characters. But I think that this is a very perfectly innocent, innocuous look at a relationship that may or may not have been fated. I love that it's just meant as a suggestion. It's just like, hey, watch this film and think about it. That's what all entertainment should be. It's not over fluff. It's not too light. I think there's some substance here. And, like I said, you connect it to your own personal life. There are moments, either you find it in religion and believing in destiny and believing a grand scheme, a greater plan, and you relate it to your own life, and there's going to be these moments where you something similar has already happened to you. And so but these other romantic comedies, I don't know how many of them would even be bold enough to talk about something like Soulmate. More often than not, like the slapstick gets in the way. I just don't. These epic love tales. There's no film quite like this.
I mean, ultimately, I think it is just about examining your life, asking yourself if you're truly happy, and taking the active steps needed to make yourself happy. Mm-hmm. Because I think what the sort of underlying story that happened with John and Sarah here is that they both realized that they weren't entirely happy with their current relationships, and so they look to their past for alternatives, and that leads them on this path to finding each other.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at it another way. Pretend that there's no fate in this movie, and pretend that Jonathan does get married to Hallie. It is conceivable at some point in the future that Hallie will meet Eve again, right? They're old college friends, or they knew each other in college. It's conceivable they'd bump into each other maybe at a college reunion, say if that's a thing. Sarah might have had some time off that night. Maybe Eve invited her along. Boom, Jonathan and Sarah meet again. Uh-oh, now they're both married. Right?
Right.
And it's such a terrifying real world circumstance. What happens? Do they hook up because they used to believe they were soulmates? But, it's if you follow it through to like the logical, this is not safe, we have to just cut off our marriages because we're not happy conclusion, you get sort of a worse situation in the end. There could have been some infidelity and some very serious consequences if the movie were not a romantic comedy and just allowed that to see that through. But these characters realize and are true to themselves that they're not happy, and they call off the wedding. Jonathan calls off the wedding. Dean says to him, maybe you're laying here because you don't want to be standing somewhere else. Boom. He does the right thing. He calls off the wedding. And that's kind of the other thing, is being a good human, even to the people that it's not going to work out with. Just be a good person. Be generous. Be honest. It's the best thing you can do.
Definitely. Any other final thoughts, Eric?
That should be about it. I love the opening sequence as well, which sets the whole thing in motion. It's sort of I want to say Rube Goldberg-esque, but there's the department store. We sort of see the inner workings of the department store. A pair of gloves happens to be, and how did it get there? There's another whole story of how they got there, but there's sort of a long take where these gloves are discovered beneath two sweaters, and the Bloomingdale's employees usher them back downstairs. Now that seconds before then, they had been sold out, right? This is the only pair of black cashmere gloves in the store, appears on the shelf just as Jonathan and Sarah separately, who don't know each other, have never interacted, both happen to see it, right? They both, there's a very limited window of time in which they both would have looked over and both could have seen that there were gloves there, because moments later, right, that third guy tries to come and take it. So it's just all about timing, the way that to the music, the gloves are slowly making their way downstairs. And it really sets the tone, I think, for a very gentle breeze of fate. Fate is not, sort of in your face as much as it is at times later in the film. This is just a nice, pleasant opening setting, and with the clouds going by and the music. The opening of this film, I think, is very palatable. And
ultimately, this movie, I like I said, I liked it. I think it was different. It's not the typical rom-com formula, I don't think. It's a fresh take on that formula, and as I said earlier, it's really not even a romantic film. It's about the pursuance of romance and of happiness, and I really appreciated that it was different.
Yeah, for sure. But knowing its tomato rating it also seems fitting that I should be talking about it because, I like the underdog films.
Agreed. And I mean, the critics exist to share their opinions of films, and that's all they are, opinions. And so when we come to Cinescope, we're talking about our films that make us happy and that we enjoy talking about. And so this, even though it's maybe not a critically acclaimed film, that doesn't mean it's not a good film, because just as many people may like it as dislike it, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was glad to talk about it with you tonight, Eric, because it is what I would call a good film. I enjoyed watching it, and we'll probably revisit it again in the future. Mm-hmm. So I think that wraps up the official 29th episode of Cinescope. Thank you again, Eric, for joining me on the show tonight.
Thank you for having me back. Come episode 54 or so, I'd love to be back again.
Definitely. We will look into that for sure. Contact for the show, facebook.com/Cinescope Podcast and @Cinescope Pod on Twitter. Please consider going to iTunes, rating, reviewing, even subscribing, sharing it with your friends. And if you have feedback or ideas, you can email at theCinescopePodcast@gmail.com. And if you're interested in co-hosting, if you have a movie that you like that maybe isn't entirely critically well acclaimed, but you think is amazing, then let me know and we will talk about it. Now, Eric, where can people find you online?
People can find me over on Twitter mostly, at Spielerman, SPIELERMAN. That's the best place, and then from there you'll find my like an Instagram account. But I'm mostly on Twitter. And again, the podcasts that I host, MuggleCast, as well as Alohomora, and the podcast I edit for Improv Star Trek on Twitter, or Improvised Star Trek Podcast. Every 5th episode was edited by me, but they're really just very smart, very hilarious cast of people. You'll love the show. You don't need to know anything about Star Trek to enjoy it. So definitely I would plug that. Everybody check it out. Awesome. The best place to find me is on Twitter at Chadadada, CHADADADA. I laugh. I'm glad you like that, Eric. And then on Facebook.com/Chad.Hopkins. And all the show notes, all the contact information, all the weird usernames can be found at thecinescopepodcast.com. And that is all for this week. Thank you, Eric, for being on the show and talking with me about a movie you love. Yeah, man. Thank you for having me, Chad. And thank you, everyone, for listening to episode 29. I'm Chad Hopkins. This was Cinescope, and we'll be back next week with episode 30. Have fun and celebrate movies.